Hey everybody, Professor Culpepper here with my steampunk garden. I've had a lot of requests with people wanting to know how to plant, build, construct, design miniature gardens. Now, if you really want a nice miniature garden, you have to look at it from the fact that it's a miniature landscape. And there are different factors that come into play with a landscape. So we're going to be talking about some of those factors, and then I'd like to address how you achieve the best look with your miniature landscape, or some people call it a fairy garden or a miniature garden. If you're into model railroading, some people have a garden railroad outdoors where they landscape it with plants. But we're going to be trying to talk about the basics. This is going to take more than one video, and hopefully we can get you started. Now, you have to have composition. Composition is just like it sounds when you're doing a painting or a piece of art. You've got to have the right properties, and they need to be placed in a proportionate manner. You need to pay attention to scale. Now, if you've got a model railroad, a lot of people understand what scale is, because if you've got a train so big, then your people have to be, miniature. Well, if you're looking at a garden and you've got elements all coming together, you need to pay attention to the scale of the plants, just so that it looks a little more real. And by looking more real, many times it's more soothing to look at. It's let's face it, a lot of this is about aesthetics and beauty. Now, some people will make a miniature garden. They don't pay attention to scale, and it doesn't bother them. They just have a nice garden in a container with lots of little plants, and it reminds them of a landscape, and they have fun with it. But to me, scale is important because that realism of the way you look at it gives you more satisfaction. Another thing is contrast, whether you're talking about the colors or the shapes. But contrast matters because it adds to the interest, and again, it adds to the realism, because when you look at a landscape outside, there's going to be different shapes, different colors, and so on. So we're going to talk about, we're going to be using those elements with the four main ways of approaching the garden with the way your plants grow. So let's talk about trees. You're going to look at a plant that has the potential of growing up and having some woodiness to it, looking like a trunk, and then something you're going to want to be able to shape into something that will present itself as a tree. Let's just use this little guy right here. This is one of my favorite plants. It is a type of chrysanthemum, daisy. If you let it go, it will get beautiful daisies like you see here. Generally, I keep them trimmed a lot so you don't see them bloom as much. And when they bloom, they tend to not look as realistic because they are not proportionate to your landscape. So with this little guy, we're getting some weak growth on it because we're growing them indoors in the winter. For us shooting this video right now, it's almost the middle of February. So a lot of these things that we have indoors growing under the lights are getting a little bit spindly, some weak growth on them. But this fella here really responds well to trimming. As you can see, as he ages, this is, believe it or not, is about a year old. Some people would look at this and say, oh, that looks like a bonsai. But bonsais take a lot more care in their pruning, and then generally you wire the limbs and you get it looking like a real, historically looking old tree. But this little guy, he's very well rooted in this pot. He's ready to go into a garden. So if you don't like fussing with plants and trimming and making sure that things look tidy, miniature gardens, you may not be very successful at it. Now, I don't want to say that to keep anybody from starting, but it is something that you need to do to keep your garden looking nice, and that is trimming and pruning. There's sometimes when I'll be sitting looking at my garden, I just can't help but go in there and fuss with it a little bit. So if you're that type of person, you're a little bit anal, miniature gardening might be for you. So this little guy, Marguerite Daisy, does come from the island of Marguerite, and it gets the pretty daisy flowers on it here, as you see, and it will grow and look very nice like a tree. This guy is a little bit older. He's about 2 years old, and you got to bring them indoors. It is a tropical plant, but the good thing about tropicals is they will continue to grow for a long time if you keep them warm. Now, perennials, they need to be outside so they can have a dormancy. Annuals generally only grow 1 year. So perennial, some of your tender perennials or tropicals do really well. Here's another tree shape. It is also a tender perennial. It's a Myrtus communis, also called myrtle, but it's not to be confused with the ground cover perennial myrtle. So as you can see, we've done a lot of pruning, and in some cases we have to put a stick to hold them upright. But this little guy really responds well to pruning and trimming. As you can see, some of those new growth that starts coming out, if you want to just trim that back, to keep that form. Now this is a perennial plant. This is lavender. And English lavender, Munstead, that variety works the best. It's a fast grower. All the lavenders respond well to trimming, so you can grow them into a little shrub. So you can use lavender as a tree, but it also works probably a little better as a shrub just because of its lower growth. So we've got the Marguerite daisy, the myrtle. Sometimes you can utilize a scented geranium as a tree if they have the smaller leaves. Small leaves is really a prerequisite to any plant that's going to be successful in your miniature garden, because it's going to look more realistic. If you put a plant in there with large leaves, again, the scale isn't going to be accurate. So that's about what I've got in this time of year for trees. Well, you can also use, this is a type of Portulacaria, somewhat related to Portulaca, but it is a succulent. And it makes a nice tree as long as you keep it trained and snip the limbs off the bottom to get your trunk look. Some of these plants have to be trained a little bit and fussed with, always pinching them so that as you pinch, then they will branch out more. And another one of the myrtles here in this one. So that's the trees. The next type of plant you're looking for is a shrub. As we talked about, the lavender makes a good one. A lot of people don't think about it, but most of your dianthus can be trimmed. And the dianthus, or not technically a carnation, but dianthus all have a carnation type of habit, and they get similar carnation flowers, but not all of them have the full carnation flowers. Most dianthus you recognize them by the less fully petaled. So they're going to be, like a single or a double flower. But this is a variety that I've kept trimmed back, and you can use that as a nice shrub. More on the grassy side of a shrub, we've got Armeria, also called sea thrift. It gets a little stem with a pom-pom flower on it. This is considered a perennial, so you can put that even in a rock garden. It'll come back for you year after year, but it will work in a container garden. This is one that people may not even think about. It makes a nice little shrub. And it will also work as somewhat of a ground cover, or a ground cover that will trail. But the shrubby looking plant is alyssum. Many people will plant it along the edge, and it gets a white or a pink or lavender flower. But being rated as an annual, it will come back, or it will continue to live for you if you bring it indoors. So put it outside, grow it in your garden, but it does well in a container garden as a specimen plant that gives you some shrub-like. Ground covers. Here's a ground cover. We have had this going in here for about a year. It is a perennial, and again, sometimes hard to keep the perennials growing indoors because they want that dormancy. But if they don't get it indoors and it's warm, they still tend to take that period to rest, and as they're resting, they look sort of dead. So this one is doing pretty well, though, considering there's a couple in here that were perennials, and they've really died back to the point where they look like they're actually dead, but they're in a dormant period. This is a miniature ajuga, and then we have a fairy fern over here, which is forgot the name right off the top of my head, but it'll probably come to me in a minute. So these make nice plants to put along the edge, and you got to keep the proportion of the plant, keeping it at the edge. That way you can see past the low plant back here where the taller plants are, and then the mid-sized plants. I apologize for the the way this garden looks, but it looked great last summer, and we're just trying to keep it alive under the lights in here till summer comes again, or at least springtime, so we can get it out and get it into the sun. So another ground cover. Do I have any? Well, it's possible to use ivy. This is a type of ivy that has a smaller leaf. Again, keeping the smaller leaves so that you can not have so much trouble with the scale of the appearance of the plant. This is another nice ground cover. You can get it either grown vegetatively, that is, you do divisions, or you can grow it from seed. This is Sagina, also called Irish moss. Very tough. It will grow in a container as well as in the ground as a perennial ground cover. Very nice in the rocks or gravel around it. Makes it a nice contrast plant because it tends to get a little more yellowish green, and it shows up when you've planted it next to other plants that have more of a dark green appearance. I failed to mention this plant, which is along the shrub line. This is Mexican heather, referred to as Kufia, and it's a great bloomer. It's always got little flowers on it, especially this time of the year. It's surprising, but another tender perennial. But if you winter it over, it does very well indoors under grow lights, and then you can readapt it back out into a container or into your yard. Grasses and fillers. The only grass I have here that even looks like something is the armeria, but many of the miniature grasses, or even plants that look like a grass, like an iris or anything that has some height to it with fan tails, can be used for a grass and a very good accent somewhere else along in the garden. But this is a type of sedum that can be used for a nice filler. So fillers and grasses, you're just looking for a different shape, keeping in mind that composition that you use is going to be much more interesting if you have different shapes, as well as different colors and the different shades of green. A lot of people overlook a plant like coleus, but after a while, when you're looking at plants, say at a nursery or at a garden center, you're going to start seeing plants that are going to be adapted to the miniature garden setting. This is a small leaf coleus, and about now, once spring comes, we'll pinch this top off, and this part here is going to start growing, and you can pretty much train this into a little shrub because it's going to keep growing out this way. You keep pinching it, and the more you pinch it, the fuller it gets, and it's going to make a nice shrubby look. So, the best advice I can give to you is always be on the lookout for plants that are going to lend themselves to a container garden. After a while, you'll start to see plants in a different way. You'll look for that smaller leaf. You'll look for something that you think, well, as that grows up, it's going to get a woody stem, and I can turn that into a tree. But there's a lot of other things to consider with miniature gardens, and some of those would be the accents, using gravel and some of the things that you would put in there, like little figurines or humanoid figurines or fairies. And you just got to develop your eye for looking at plants that will work. And next video, we're going to be talking about some of the other elements to add to make your fairy garden or miniature garden look nice and be something that when you see it, it's going to be soothing and it's going to be something you're proud of. So thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to Professor Culpepper.